Next presentation will be from Paul Burge, and he'll be talking about conducting a noise survey with a sound level meter. So take it away, Paul.
Hello, I'm Paul Burge. Welcome to the tutorial session on sound level meters. This presentation is on conducting a sound survey with a sound level meter. This tutorial session on sound level meters so far has covered topics on different types of sound level meters, how they are different, understanding how they work, appropriate settings and analysis features, and how to conduct a basic sound level meter reading. This part of the tutorial takes the last step and discusses planning, execution, and documentation of a sound survey using one or more sound level meters. So what is a sound survey? Generally, a survey is the act of gathering multiple data points. So this could be a political or opinion survey, a geological survey, or many others. For the sake of this presentation, we will assume that a sound survey is a collection of sound measurements taken over a variety of locations, times, operating conditions, or other parameters. Sound surveys could include an indoor survey, such as a workplace, office, or factory floor, schools, hospitals, or an outdoor survey, such as in communities near transportation, commercial, industrial, or power generation acoustical sources, or even in a natural setting far from any man-made sound. So let's talk about how to conduct a good sound survey. Like so many other things in life, there are three keys to completing a successful sound survey: planning, execution, and follow-through. So maybe not too different than a good golf swing or retirement planning. So let's take a look at them one at a time. So you know what they say, a failure to plan is a plan to fail, right? So here's three keys to planning a successful sound survey. First, know what data you need to collect. 2, create a survey work plan. And 3, check your equipment and supplies. So conducting a sound survey is just going out there and collecting some sound data, right? Not exactly. As you may know, sound level meters can be set up to collect all kinds of acoustical data with different metrics, response settings, averaging, weighting options, and over different time frames. Understanding the required sound level meter settings and parameters for your specific project, as well as the measurement intervals and durations, locations, and special operating conditions, can be critically important to the success of your survey. You must research ahead of time how, what, when, and where, and for how long you need to measure, and what are the operational data or observations are required for the project. There are likely some kind of technical standards, agency regulations or guidance, or some of the client-specified procedures that you need to follow. These often specify what metrics to collect, measurement locations and durations, and other important observations. Find out and do it right the first time. So you want to create a plan. Create an actual written down sound survey work plan, whether you're doing the work yourself or you're assigning it to someone else. The plan should include all or most of these elements. I have a number of things listed here, and you go through them individually. There's a couple that I wanted to highlight. Your plan should always include a map or a diagram or at least a list describing the plan measurement locations. You want to reference any special guidance, procedures, or standards that need to be followed. And you also want to define what meteorological requirements or limitations apply to the sound survey. For example, for most outdoor measurements, you don't want to do them when it's raining or even when the roadways are wet, or maybe even when there's snow on the ground or when the wind is above a certain level, and everything else on this list. So once you've created your plan, you want to share it. So you want to share it with other project partners, such as your teammates who will be in the field with you, project managers, client representatives, agency reviewers, if appropriate, for their review and suggestions. This will allow them to understand what you have planned and allow them to ask questions or to provide reasonable modifications, such as adding or removing planned measurement locations. If nothing else, they will better understand that you are planning ahead, you know what you're doing, you're asking for their input, and you're allowing for contingencies. A successful sound survey depends on having the correct equipment available and in good operating condition. We usually recommend developing a standard equipment packing list to ensure that nothing important gets left behind, including the following. And I have listed several items here, most of which may seem fairly obvious, but always good to be able to check off the list as you're getting them packed. Specifically for sound level meters, including their associated microphones and preamps, you want to make sure that they're all within their laboratory calibration, including any field calibrators that you will be taking along. A lot of the stuff on this list, if you forget it, you may be able to find something else in the field at a hardware store or a Best Buy. Something that's very hard to find is windscreens. You usually can't find those. If you forget your windscreens, either someone's going to go back for them or someone's going to ship them out to you. So make sure you never forget those. You also want to make sure you have pre-printed field data sheets, and it's always a good idea to have project documentation, like a copy of your contract or permission to enter letter, or at the very least, a copy of your sound survey plan, in case anybody wants to know what you're doing. So within a few days of your planned trip, you might want to double check a few of these items. You want to check the local weather forecast, if it's applicable, for, say, an outdoor measurement, and check for certain weather conditions you may want to avoid, such as rain, snow cover, low or high temperatures, high winds. And if they're not appropriate, you may need to reschedule. If you're traveling, you want to double check your travel arrangements and any items that may be shipped separately. And also want to check in with any local contacts you may need to contact while you're out there. It may be a property owner or project manager, a client representative. So just want to let them know when you're going to be on site. All right, moving on to execution. Follow these steps during your execution phase of the survey to maximum the likelihood of a successful survey. You have a plan, you want to follow it. You want to work safe, you want to use proper documentation, and you want to exercise professionalism. So following the plan. This may seem trivial, but a failure to follow a survey plan is the same thing as really not having a plan at all. So you want to make sure that everybody associated with the survey has a copy of the plan and they understand their role. Often, if these surveys may span several days, you may want to consider having a quick morning meeting every morning or a tailgate meeting to review the progress you've made and any changes. And don't be afraid to update your plan as you proceed, as conditions or weather conditions or desired operational conditions may change. You also want to work safe. Any work performed away from the office should include some sort of a safe work plan, such as a reminder to obey local traffic laws. Should always be extra careful driving when you're working on the job, wearing seat belts, avoiding distractions, and avoid using your cell phone while you're driving. You want to identify any on-site hazards that may exist for your project, including heavy machinery or moving equipment, outdoor environmental hazards such as animals, insects, prolonged exposure to sun, heat, or cold, or even aggressive and uncooperative people, and how to deal with each one of these. We also want to include directions in the address of the closest urgent care facility in case of an emergency. Consider having more than one person on field trips, and identify any company or client required safety training. This is important because some clients, including clients like railroad and transit agencies, oil refineries, other industrial properties, may have their own safety training that require you to take before you can be on their property. Also note that a safe work plan may be required by your own company. Proper documentation. A sound measurement without proper documentation is worthless. We have a list of things that we have on a standard field data sheet you may want to consider including on your standard sheet or a pre-printed one you get from someplace else. I want to touch on a few of these. You want to make sure you have the name of the person conducting the measurement in case any questions come up. You want to make sure that you're recording meteorological observations so you can ensure that the measurements were conducted under appropriate conditions. And as we mentioned before, there's almost always something besides just the sound data itself, which is very important, such as traffic counts or aircraft overflights or what construction operation equipment is operating or other equipment on the factory floor. It's important to be able to know what was going on during each one of those recorded sound measurements. And not having that information usually means somebody else is going to have to go out and redo it. So let's talk a little bit about professionalism. What does that mean in the scope of a sound survey? Well, Whether you run into people out there for the client or people in the public, you want to look and act professionally. You want to look clean and wearing appropriate attire at all times, appropriate shoes, long pants, long sleeve shirt. You may consider wearing a safety vest and even a hard hat if you're operating anywhere near heavy equipment or near highways or rail lines. You want to always carry personal identification, at least a driver's license, and preferably also professional business cards, and if possible, some sort of project documentation, such a copy of a work order or a contract, in case someone wants to know what you're doing there. Also important is that unless it is actually part of your responsibilities, and usually it's not, you want to avoid interacting with the public to the amount that you can. You want to minimize or avoid talking to people if you can get away with it, since that's not part of your job. If you are approached by someone, inquiring member of the public, and they want to know what you're doing, try to pass that off to someone who's identified as a project manager who's actually authorized to talk to the public. All right, wrap up and completion. So the survey's not done when you get back from the field or the project site. There's still a few important things to do. You want to check and save documentation, you want to restock your equipment, and you want to prepare a preliminary sound survey report. Proper documentation is the key to successful and defensible sound survey. As we mentioned, you want to self-check all your data sheets for organization, completeness, legibility, and consider rewriting data sheets if they're not clearly legible. Sometimes when you fill these things out in the field on a clipboard, it's not the very best conditions, but if they're not legible, they're not going to do anybody good, so recopy them if you need to. You also want to have somebody else do a quick quality review for your documentation. They can check legibility and completeness. They can check that all the fields are filled in correctly and completely. And they can also do a check to make sure that the sound levels actually make sense. Then once the sheets have been completed and checked, you can scan all the data sheets and notes and save them into an appropriate project directory. Take care of your equipment and it'll take care of you. When you return to the office, unpack, download, and restock all the equipment you used along with any unused supplies to the proper location. Check to make sure all the equipment is in good operating condition and no damage has occurred. Very important, make note of any potential equipment damage or apparent malfunction that happened during the survey. If it's a non-trivial issue, set the equipment aside for closer inspection or maintenance or repair if needed, but do not return faulty equipment or suspect equipment to the regular equipment inventory. To do so will only lead to future equipment failure for you or a coworker on subsequent assignments. This is also a good time to process any appropriate equipment billing forms that may be part of the project. Consider preparing a preliminary sound survey report. Now, this may be something as simple as creating a modified version of the sound survey plan to update the planned measurement locations and procedures to what the actual ones were. You can include notes of what the weather conditions were, a table or charts reporting what the sound measurement results were, including a log of what the activities were or what other occurrences took place. You can also include a photo log of all the photos and the captions of the photos taken for each of the measurement locations. And also include details about observations that may be relative to the project or the interpretation of the sound measurement data. And this sound survey report, preliminary sound survey report, may be the beginning part for what will eventually become the noise measurement section of a report or the noise survey portion of an appendix. So the conclusions. Knowing how to select, set up, and operate a sound level meter is just a prerequisite. Creating a comprehensive sound survey plan will help to eliminate miscommunication, mistakes, forgotten items, or other problems in the field. Proper execution of a well-written plan can ensure a successful, safe, and professional survey. And proper follow-through will help to prevent data loss and ensure that everything is ready for the next project. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for the talk, Paul. I'm waiting on some questions here, but I do have a question for you to start off, and that is, I really like what you said about preparing for the survey and getting input from those involved, not just from the client, but from your leadership at your company, maybe folks in the community, if there's community regulations that need to be followed. I'm curious, can you give people an idea how long that process of getting information actually takes. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, if I'm assuming correctly.
Oh, you mean as far as having someone review your plan?
Yes.
Well, it doesn't have to take a long time. And a lot of times you're getting paid by a client to go out and conduct this survey. Hopefully they're hiring you because you're well respected, you know what you're doing. But it's always good to give them an opportunity to review it and add to it. I don't know that this needs to take more than a day. I mean, if you get it done a few days ahead of time, that gives them a little extra time to review. But a lot of times they'll say, you know, we've got some complaints from the people in this area. Could you do a measurement there? Or we know that someone who lives here where you have a planned measurement is not very cooperative with the project. You might want to avoid that one. So sometimes they have some very good input. And like I said, it's always good for them to know that you're planning ahead and you're taking those things into consideration. But I would say as long as you get something to them a few days ahead of time, that gives them a chance to look it over and make any potential comments or modifications.
Thanks. If there's any other questions out there, please enter them into the Q&A at this point. So, Paul, while we're waiting on questions, I wonder if you had any anecdotes of the craziest things you've run into while you're out doing a noise survey.
Well, I think I tried to emphasize during a couple of points of the presentation that the sound level is really only part of what you need to collect. And I've been in situations before where I've assigned someone to go out and do, for example, sound measurements to help validate a traffic noise model. And they came back and they had all the sound data and they collected all the meteorological data and took photos and everything, but they didn't get any traffic counts. That was worthless. We had to go redo it. The traffic count is the important thing you needed to do in that circumstance. If you're out doing measurements at a construction site and you said, well, we had some exceedance during this period, say, well, what was happening at that time? Was it a pile driver? Was it a hoe ram? Say, I don't know. Well, those are the things you have to note. Usually just collecting the acoustical data is not enough. You have to understand why these measurements are being done and documenting what is going on while the measurements are being conducted.
Great. And we do have a question or a comment. Maybe you can expand on this from Eldon. He says, when a test is going to be witnessed, make sure you have a dry run a day or two ahead of time. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, I think we did talk about, and of course, a survey is a very broad topic. And I think in a situation where you're trying to measure something to document that it's in compliance with a certain regulation and so forth, that kind of comes back again to making sure that you understand what the standard or the regulation is that you need to satisfy. And understanding if you just get out there without having research, you may be collecting the wrong metrics or something, and sometimes you can't necessarily post-process that mistake. You'd have to go out and redo it. So if a dry run means getting out there a day or two ahead of time just to make sure that all the components that you need to measure are in place and so forth, that wouldn't be a bad idea. And especially if it's something that a measurement that is going to be maybe upheld in like a court of law or something like that, you want to make sure you have as much of that information buttoned down as possible.
Okay, we've come to the end of our questions and we've got about a minute or so left before we switch to the next presentation. I'll give Tyler a chance. Tyler, did you have any questions?
I think, and Paul, let me know if you kind of agree with this, but like this sort of thing really is what separates the people that are good at this and the people that just kind of, press go on the sound level meter. You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it in order to really add any value to the measurement.
Well, I think that's what we said at the beginning, that knowing how to use and operate a sound level meter is a prerequisite, but understanding how to use it in with reference to the particular project you're working on and what are the data needs to be collected and what type of data and the format of the data that needs to be collected in order to make sure you're meeting your objective, and knowing what those requirements are ahead of time. And I think that's something when I'm in a situation pretty often where I'm asked to review other people's work, and often the work that I'm reviewing is done by someone who is not a noise specialist, but maybe like a general environmentalist, and they don't understand that. And when sometimes the review says, where is your field data sheet that documents what was going on and the weather conditions were appropriate? And they say, oh, well, that's all on the meter. Didn't need to write anything down. I go, well, now you have to go redo it and do it correctly, because just recording sound levels is not, almost never is adequate for the task at hand.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Well, thank you, Paul, for the presentation and all that information. Much appreciated.